You didn't even care. You were the one that was like, oh, sound quality doesn't matter. We're amateurs. It doesn't matter. And the entire year I've been like, our sound is off. This is off. And you're like, who cares? And I'm like, well, if we're going to do something, let's do it right.
Is that what you were like?
Yeah, that's what I was like. What were you like?
Smug as a bug.
You are literally smug as a bug in the rug. Can't.
Are you going to admit your mistake?
What's my mistake? You keep saying...
You're the one who runs the software.
I don't run the software.
Who? Is it me? See how you don't answer the question?
Fine, I run this. We wouldn't even have a podcast if it weren't for me.
I have asked you. See, I love the bait and switch, the what about
It's
it.
not a bait and switch.
You don't answer the question. I've asked you, do you want me to do this? And you say no. Like...
Because you do it wrong.
Oh, do I? Is that what happens?
Yeah, you do. Like...
When have I been allowed to run the software?
It's just
because it's just you messing it up over there, and you can't admit it.
I messed it up like once.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Listen, Linda.
All right.
Anyway.
Back to our regularly scheduled program.
I love you.
I love you.
Welcome to MD Longevity Lab, where we're playing the long game. This is a podcast where science meets real life, with expert insights, practical tips, and real-world tools to not only live longer, but live better. Our aim is to radically change the way medicine is practiced and enable individuals to age gracefully, maintaining health span and vitality well into their later years. We're your hosts, Dr. Nisha and Dr. Vikas Patel, physicians, partners in life, and parents balancing work, wellness, and everything in between. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to our podcast. This is part 2 of our deep dive into GLP-1s, GIPs, and the broader class of incretin-based medicines. As you know, last week we did cover part 1. If you missed that, please go back right now. We'll wait. Seriously, it's the foundation. Everything in this episode really builds upon that last one.
Yeah, in part 1, we set up the evolutionary context, walked through the pharmacology of GLP-1s like semaglutide, tirzepatide, and Retta. We covered the new oral forms, including the new oral forms of semaglutide that are FDA approved. And we spent real time on the extraordinary systemic benefits of these GLP-1 medications that go way beyond weight loss.
Part 2 is where we go into a lot of the kind of uncomfortable truths about these medications, the muscle loss data, and what it actually means for longevity if you don't have a plan. We're going to cover the weight regain biology, also kind of lay the foundation of the compounding pharmacy landscape, which is a patient safety crisis kind of waiting to happen. And more importantly, we're going to give you the tools to be successful on GLPs, the complete kind of 5-pillar protocol for using these drugs with the long game mentality in mind.
Yes. So basically, this episode is a Cliff Notes version of how to use GLP-1s as a tool to keep the weight off for the long haul and preserve muscle while getting all the benefits, all the systemic benefits that we talked about in episode 1. So I want to say up front, none of what we cover today is meant to scare people away from these medications. We have plenty of patients on them, friends, family. We have seen lives transformed on these medications. But informed consent requires honesty. And right now, a lot of patients are making major medical decisions with their GLP-1s without the full picture.
So let's get started with the data. I don't know if this keeps me up at night, but there is an impact from these medications on our body composition, and it's really worth diving into.
So let's start with the trial data, because we should ground this in evidence like we do everything else rather than an anecdote. In the major semaglutide trials, roughly 39% of total weight loss was lean body mass, which includes skeletal muscle, connective tissue, and fluid. In the tirzepatide trials, the numbers were somewhat better, around 30% of lean muscle mass. But let's be clear, even 30% of your lean muscle mass out of the total weight loss is pretty bad.
Yeah, put that into concrete terms so people understand.
So if someone loses 40 pounds on a GLP-1, approximately 15 to 16 of those pounds could be lean muscle mass. Some portion of that is fluid and connective tissue, but a meaningful percentage of that is skeletal muscle. And unlike fat, which your body, we all know from your evolutionary episode, your body is very willing to rebuild fat in the wrong conditions, right? We have ultra processed foods, sedentary lifestyle, stress. Muscle does not come back passively. Fat does. Muscle, you have to earn back through deliberate effort.
Exactly. So GLP-1s really do not distinguish between fat and muscle. And the reason this matters so profoundly from a longevity standpoint is it's not just for aesthetics and not just for strength. It's that skeletal muscle is genuinely one of the most important longevity organs that we have. Muscle is the primary site for us utilizing glucose. That's where when we eat sugar, where the muscle first goes is into our muscle tissue. When you're on a GLP and you're not giving your body the right inputs, you end up losing muscle mass. You actually can technically worsen your insulin sensitivity. So you end up increasing your long-term risk of type 2 diabetes, even though the scale numbers are going down and even though your clothes are fitting better. The metabolic improvement from weight loss can be partially or even fully counteracted by the muscle loss, just depending on how severe the muscle loss is.
Yeah, muscle mass is also one of the strongest predictors of survival almost every major disease category. Cancer treatment outcomes, I know for my own diagnosis, that was a game changer for me. And that's what put that flame under my butt to really build muscle, right? Post-surgical recovery, hospitalization, sepsis, infections. When researchers study what predicts who walks out of an ICU, muscle mass is consistently one of the most powerful variables. And let's be clear, none of us choose to be in an ICU, but we just have to prepare for the worst case scenario. There's a reason we don't send patients to the operating room without assessing their nutritional and muscle status. Low muscle mass, or sarcopenia is the medical term for it. This is independently associated with higher all-cause mortality in study after study.
And here's the specific longevity math that I want you to internalize. If you are, say, 60 years old, have been metabolically unhealthy for years, and you lose 40 pounds on a GLP-1 agonist without some sort of muscle preservation strategy, you have dramatically improved your cardiometabolic picture, but you simultaneously are accelerating your trajectory towards frailty. So you're kind of just like trading one risk for another risk. The goal is to reduce your metabolic risk and preserve or build muscle, not really one or the other.
And that most definitely can be done successfully on a GLP-1 with intention and the right guidance. There's also the resting metabolic rate piece, which compounds a regain problem, which we'll discuss in the next segment. Plenty of patients we've heard, I've been on a GLP-1, the second I get off, I gain the weight back, right? I'm sure that's a common story for many of our listeners. Muscle is metabolically expensive tissue. It burns 6 calories per pound per day just at rest, right? Compared to fat, which burns roughly 2.5 calories. So when you lose 15 pounds of lean muscle mass, you've dropped your resting metabolic rate by something in the range of 90 calories per day. This was also another flame under my butt to build muscle because I love to eat. I love desserts. And knowing that just putting on some muscle, I'm burning extra calories at rest, that was a game changer for me. But I know that 90 calories sounds small, but over a year, that's 33,000 calories. That's nearly 10 pounds of fat accumulation potential just from sitting there if you have that extra muscle.
So what do we do about this? Because the data is clear, but it's also not a reason to avoid the medications. It's a reason to be strategic. Let's talk about the two big levers that we can pull on, protein and resistance training. Protein first. And let's be specific here because vague advice is kind of useless. The recommended daily allowance for protein, it used to be 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. That number was established to prevent deficiency in sedentary people. It wasn't a good target for muscle preservation really during like a caloric restriction, which is what's happening when you're on a GLP. The evidence for people trying to maintain muscle mass on a GLP, especially during aggressive caloric reduction, really supports 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. In older adults and in highly catabolic situations, some research really supports going as high as 2.4 grams per kilogram per day.
Yeah, I remember when you asked me to just track my protein 3 years ago, we had this discussion and I was very resistant to any advice from you, partially because we're married and it's like, I don't want to do the told you so gotcha game, but
Because you love me so much?
I love you, but like, I don't need you to tell me what to do. Like I should be able to do what I want to do.
Because you like making mistakes?
I don't make any, what? I've never made a mistake. What do you mean? I don't know. Okay. I've made plenty of mistakes. I don't know if I've ever readily admitted to my mistakes.
There was, in fact, for the audience, there was a mistake leading into the recording of this episode.
That was your mistake.
For not having told you how to do.
Listen, Linda, I cannot possibly do everything in this house with our kids at work. So just say thank you and let's move on.
Thank you for making a mistake.
Oh my God. Thank you. No, but I remember when you asked me to track my protein and I was pretty combative, but when I started tracking, it was crazy. I was barely getting 60 grams a day, maybe 70 on a good day. And I was eating protein bars, maybe meat once a day. And I'm thinking I'm killing it, right? I'm working out at the gym, but I wasn't seeing any gains. And when Vikas told me like your requirement, like that's your requirement just to exist, right? Just for your organs to function. I needed double that amount to really thrive, to be in an optimal range and to actually see the fruits of my labor, right? I was putting in the time training, but I just wasn't seeing the gains. So that was something that I definitely learned.
But you ended up doing the work, right? It was this combination of resistance training plus the right amount of protein. So to put it into practical terms, like a 180-pound person, that's about 82 kilograms. They need somewhere between 130 and 180 grams of protein a day. That's a lot. That's like 4 chicken breasts or roughly 6 to 8 eggs plus 2 cups of Greek yogurt plus a protein shake. It requires deliberate planning. It just does not happen accidentally.
Yeah. And here's a GLP-1 specific nuance that is critically important. These drugs reduce appetite dramatically, sometimes to the point where patients are eating 600 or 800 fewer calories a day. We've had plenty of patients say like it's hard to even drink a glass of water on these medications. They are really powerful medications. That's the mechanism. But if you're eating 700 fewer calories and you're not actively structuring your intake around protein, you will be severely under consuming protein. And we see this constantly. Patients whose total food intake has dropped to 1,200 calories, but they're eating mostly whatever their suppressed appetite will tolerate, crackers, alcohol, that's a popular one on nausea days, pretzels, toast, bread, things that feel okay on a queasy stomach, and almost zero protein. And we learn later on that completely backfires.
Yeah, the weight loss, like most of the time, doctors will recommend losing a pound a week. And these drugs have the ability to make you lose 1.5, 2 pounds a week, 3 pounds a week sometimes. That's how large of a calorie deficit they can put you into. And going fast, while like mentally, I think it's wonderful because people feel like they're seeing results. It's that immediate reward thing. In the long run, it's really hurting them because that severe calorie restriction without protein intake nets them such a huge muscle loss. So the clinical guidance that we give every single patient at MD Longevity is protein is basically non-negotiable. And it comes first at every meal. Before the complex carbs, the first thing that goes on your plate and into your body is a high quality protein source. We're talking lean meats, poultry, fish, eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, edamame, soybeans. And if you can't hit your protein target through whole foods on any given day because the nausea is real, a high quality protein shake is entirely appropriate. And we very actively recommend it.
There's also some important nuance around the leucine threshold, which is the amount of amino acid leucine in a single meal that's needed to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Leucine is that amino acid that's more commonly found in animal products. That threshold is approximately 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine per meal. Most high quality animal proteins will get you there around 25 to 30 grams of total protein per serving. Plant proteins in general require higher volumes to hit that leucine threshold, which is important for patients who are plant-based and may already be eating less due to appetite suppression from a GLP-1.
Resistance training is the second non-negotiable. And again, the data is pretty clear. 2023 analysis of GLP-1s, users on GLP-1s who engaged in structural resistance training showed dramatically attenuated lean muscle mass loss compared to matched patients on medication alone. And in some cases, patients actually maintained or gained muscle while losing fat. That is really the ideal outcome, not just weight loss, but body recomposition, fat down, muscle preserved. That's the long game.
Oh yeah. If I had a nickel for the amount of times I see perimenopausal women like myself waste away precious muscle because they are not resistance training while on a GLP-1, well, let's just say I probably wouldn't be driving my Kia. Well, actually, I love my Kia. My Kia is great. Actually, the kids even like my Kia more than your car.
You're ridiculous. Kia, if you're listening, we would love a sponsorship.
Yeah. Remember the Kia Soul with the like rats?
The rats? Yeah, they were cool. So we've seen this happen. You remember one of our first patients who came to get a DEXA? She was in a weight loss challenge at work, and she had started a GLP-1. I believe it was a 3-month weight loss challenge. She was a gymnast in college and she knew how to lift weights. And she's like, since college, she'd put on about 60 pounds of extra weight. And she's like, I know exactly what I need to do. Life happened. And now I know I'm ready to be in a calorie deficit, but I know exactly how to do the resistance training. She came back and she'd lost, what was it, like 30 pounds? Yeah. But she had, in her body composition on her DEXA, her lean muscle mass had actually gone up by 10 pounds while she had lost 30 pounds of total weight, which was crazy. That means that she'd lost 40 pounds of fat and actually put on 10 pounds of muscle to net that 30-pound weight loss. So it's entirely possible. It's just, it requires you to give your body the stimulus and be very very good about tracking your protein. You don't have to track your calories, but you have to track your protein. So the minimum effective dose of resistance training in this context, really it's 2 to 3 sessions per week of compound movements. Compound means multi-joint exercises that engage large muscle groups. So these are going to be your squat movements, your deadlifts, Romanian deadlifts, hip hinges, rows, presses outward. You don't need to be like a competitive powerlifter. You need to give your body a mechanical loading signal that says this muscle is being used and challenged and needs to be maintained. Without that signal, the caloric deficit would send your signal this biological incentive to basically get rid of whatever's most expensive. And muscle is the most expensive tissue in our body to maintain.
Yeah, and let's address the energy argument because we hear it all the time. I'm nauseous, I'm tired on this GLP-1, and I don't have the energy to resistance train. And that's a real experience, especially for patients in the first few weeks of starting a GLP. But the answer is not to skip resistance training indefinitely. Start at whatever level you can sustain: body weight squats, push-ups, knee push-ups, resistant bands even count, lighter loads count. Something is always better than nothing, because nothing means that muscle loss window is open and completely unguarded.
We mentioned 2 to 3 workout sessions a week. You can literally do as little as 35 minutes twice a week in compound movements. And as long as you're not taking long rest breaks between your sets, that is enough to preserve muscle. If you add the third day, it's actually enough to build muscle. So an hour to an hour and a half of training a week is enough to preserve and even potentially build muscle if you have enough protein intake. Another technique that gets used that can be really helpful here is blood flow restriction training. This is where you wear bands around your arms or legs. It's a technique where basically you can use much lighter loads with this venous occlusion that occurs from bands or cuffs that you put around your limbs. It's been shown to produce meaningful muscle preservation as well as hypertrophy stimulation, so growth at loads as little as 20 to 30% of your 1 rep max. So if you can bench press 100 pounds, right, you could work out with just 20 or 30 pounds and still get meaningful gain where you're preserving your muscle and even gaining some by using something like BFR. So for patients who genuinely cannot tolerate those heavy resistance sessions, right, because of arthritis or they've had surgery, they have high levels of GI distress, BFR can be a pretty meaningful bridge.
Right. So I think we've hammered home, for those of you who are on a GLP-1 who are resistance training, we're giving you a high five, pat on the back. You are crushing it. For those of you who are on a GLP-1 who are not resistance training, you are leaving valuable muscle on the table. And this is not playing the long game, right? This is valuable muscle that you need to preserve. So we encourage you to start resistance training. All right, let's move on to the monitoring piece.
If you're on a GLP medication and you're not tracking body composition, you're kind of flying blind. A full body DEXA, which actually measures lean muscle mass, fat mass, bone density, all separately, that would give you a wonderful baseline at the start of your GLP treatment. So if you were to get one at your start, then get one, say 6 months in, 12 months in, you're really able to see what's changing more so than just what the scale is showing you. The scale is not really distinguishing between fat and muscle, and that distinction really determines whether this intervention is improving your longevity or inadvertently compromising it.
I can think of a handful of patient situations that are pretty common. There's a lot of perimenopausal patients that are like, I have 5 or 10 pounds to lose just in my belly. And many of these women are under-muscled, significantly under-muscled to begin with. I was one of those patients. And for me, as much as I wanted to go on a GLP-1 and get that weight down, I needed to make that mental shift of, for me, starting out 3 years ago, under muscled, me starting a GLP-1 is actually going to be detrimental for the long haul. I might see the scale go down and be super happy about that, but I already am completely under muscled. I think I was in the bottom 9th percentile 3 years ago. And so it's taken me 3 years and my weight has probably gone up 2 pounds. My pant size has gone down. I have put on some muscle, lost some body fat. But if I'm one of those patients that's flying blind and I'm just going on a GLP-1 just for the hell of it, just to get that number on the scale down, I am losing valuable muscle. And a lot of times you're losing 2 pounds of muscle for 1 pound of fat, especially for someone like me in the 120s and 130s. And so that's something we definitely want to emphasize to patients. Like, you do not want to just focus on that number of the scale. You have to get that full body DEXA scan to get the full picture of where you stand.
The postmenopausal woman, I think, is the most dangerous use case because, so let's say that a woman was relatively lean most of her life. Most women who are relatively lean that did not specifically train to increase muscle mass, they tend to just have lower muscle mass because they didn't need to move a lot of weight around, right? They go through menopause, and there's a lot of things I think that stink for women about menopause, but one of them is that they start taking on the male phenotype, right? They start accumulating belly fat, which men develop a little bit earlier. But when women lose the protective benefits of the estrogen, they start accumulating belly fat. So now if that woman has put on 10, 15 pounds of belly fat and they're like, I want to get rid of this, let me go on the GLP, right? And they're not doing the resistance training and protein intake. When they lose that 10 or 15 pounds, yes, will they lose some belly fat? Of course they will. But will they also lose some of that very important structural muscle tissue, which they didn't have a lot to begin with because they'd been relatively lean most of their life? They're going to lose some of that. Now they've increased that frailty index, which I think is really the thing that we want to avoid at all costs. I'd rather have a patient be 15 pounds overweight than to have them lose muscle mass and be at a higher risk for fall and then subsequently fracture.
Oh, yeah. I think we just had a patient not too long ago. She was normal BMI. She was actually killing it in the muscle department, 50th percentile. Her ALMI was great. She was 30% body fat. So she definitely wanted to lose some body fat post kids. She's in her mid 40s. And for that patient, using GLP-1 low dose as a tool to reduce body fat is perfect, right? Her patiently staying on that lowest effective dose, getting her protein in, getting her resistance training, like that is the jackpot. And even if it takes a couple months for this patient to reduce her body fat, that patient is killing it because she's got the muscle reserve. She knows what she needs to do, and she's already got the right systems in place.
Okay, so this is a part of the episode that, you need to save, screenshot, send to your doctor, post in a Facebook group, whatever it takes to remember, because this is what an actually intelligent, longevity-oriented approach to GLP-1 therapy would look like. Nisha, why don't you start us by walking us through these 5 pillars?
Yep. The first pillar is body composition monitoring, not just what your weight is on the scale. We've covered the full body DEXA scan before, doing it at baseline before you start a GLP, at 6 months and at 12 months, tracking your muscle, your fat independently, your bone health. And if muscle is dropping disproportionately to fat, that's a clinical signal that warrants adjusting protein in your training approach. The scale is a blunt instrument, right? Completely blind. Your body composition data from a DEXA scan is what you actually need. And this is where sometimes we hear patients say, I'm on this high dose, I'm hitting a plateau. Sometimes that's your body just screaming, like, if you go higher on this dose, you're going to be losing muscle. And that's where we emphasize the importance of not just going on a GLP blindly and doing it under the care of a physician who's actually taking the time to, stress the importance of protein intake, resistance training, and do the full body DEXA scan.
Second pillar, it's really protein architecture. So 1.6 to 2.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight daily. The higher end, if you are older and your body is not as capable of recycling protein, you can be on the lower end if you're already closer to your weight loss goals. But protein first, always on your meal plate, at least 25 to 30 grams of high quality protein per meal to hit that leucine threshold, which allows us to enable muscle protein synthesis. Use protein shakes strategically, especially on high nausea days, not just as the default, but as the safety net. And you got to track it, at least initially, until you have a reliable intuition for what adequate protein intake actually looks like in your diet. Most people are dramatically underestimating how much they're eating and overestimating what their protein intake might actually be.
All right. So we covered the first pillar, which is body comp monitoring. The second pillar, you covered protein. The third pillar, which is structured resistance training while on a GLP-1, 2 to 3 sessions per week, every week for the entire duration of treatment and beyond. These compound movements are the foundation, and this is what's going to preserve that muscle, right? And we always talk about progressive overload, meaning you're gradually increasing your load or volume over time to continue to provide your body with that adaptive stimulus. So if you are still doing the same weight or reps 6 months later, that's not progressive overload, right? Today I went to the gym and I deadlifted. What's the bar plus 45 on each side?
135.
135. I literally put 5 extra pounds on each side because I'm like, this is what progressive overload is. And my husband's going to be so proud of me for crushing it.
High five.
Are you proud?
I am proud.
Thanks. Anyway, so this isn't something you start once you reach your goal weight. Resistance training has to start at the start of your GLP-1. It starts week 1 of treatment and it never stops because that window of rapid weight loss is also the window of maximum muscle vulnerability, and you do not want to lose muscle.
Fourth pillar, the metabolic biomarker panel. At minimum, people should know their fasting insulin or HOMA-IR. These are direct measures of our insulin sensitivity because the scale going down doesn't really guarantee that insulin sensitivity is improving, though it is likely to trend in the right direction. You need to know your hemoglobin A1C, a complete lipid panel, including ApoB, and at least one time in your life, an LPA level, because the standard LDL undersells cardiovascular risk. High sensitivity CRP, which is a marker for inflammation, is also very useful. A complete metabolic panel for kidney and liver function, especially relevant given the GI and kidney effects on these medications. And ideally, a hormone panel, particularly in women over 40, because the interaction between GLP-1 therapy, estrogen, and metabolic health is clinically important and often overlooked.
All right. And this brings us to the fifth pillar, and something Vikas and I talk about constantly with our female patients, myself included, the perimenopause and menopause intersection, because women in their 40s and 50s are one of the highest use groups for these medications. We grew up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s where it was skinny on the scale with these supermodels on these magazines. And it's just ingrained in our head that we should be skinny, right? So many of the GLP-1 patients end up being these women that are in perimenopause that are like, man, I put on 5 or 10 pounds. And there's also a hormonal environment that we don't discuss, and that's simultaneously driving visceral fat accumulation, muscle loss acceleration, insulin resistance progression, and even bone density decline. These are not independent problems. They're all compounding ones.
This is exactly what we just talked about a few minutes earlier, right? Like with that increased visceral fat deposition in postmenopause, these are the women that are most susceptible to the problems of GLP-1s because as they're losing weight, they're going to lose muscle and bone density at the same time. And they're already losing bone density just from the estrogen loss alone.
Mm-hmm. But the core point here is that declining estrogen directly impairs muscle protein synthesis. It accelerates sarcopenia, redistributes fat from subcutaneous fat, which is the fat we can pinch, to our visceral fat, our belly fat, and it worsens insulin resistance. So a perimenopausal woman on a GLP-1 agonist without a hormonal evaluation and without a robust resistance training program is simultaneously fighting estrogen-driven muscle loss and GLP-1-driven muscle loss. So it's just accelerating that process. So that's two major catabolic forces operating at the same time. And nobody's connecting those dots for her, right? And we all know that our healthcare system is dysfunctional. I think that goes without saying. So we're really doing these women a disservice. So that fifth pillar for women is a complete picture, means we're not just adding the appetite medication in isolation. We're looking at the full hormonal, metabolic, and musculoskeletal picture.
Yeah, let me add a sleep piece here, which kind of fits under the broader clinical picture. Sleep deprivation directly increases ghrelin and suppresses leptin. It increases glucose metabolism, elevates cortisol, and then promotes fat accumulation, particularly the bad fat, that visceral fat. If you're on a GLP-1 medicine and you're sleeping 6 hours a night, you are pharmacologically suppressing appetite with one hand and hormonally driving fat storage and metabolic dysfunction with the other. You can't optimize the outcome of these drugs without optimizing sleep. They're not really separate variables.
Yeah. So let's summarize the 5 pillars that we discussed. Body comp tracking with a full body DEXA scan, protein architecture, with structured resistance training, strength training, which we talked about, complete blood biomarker testing and monitoring, and the full clinical picture, right? Hormones, sleep, stress. When we run all 5 pillars concurrently with GLP-1 therapy, the outcomes are genuinely different. They're sustainable. Fat goes down, muscle is preserved, metabolic markers improve, and critically, there's behavior and physiological foundation begins to be built. And those are the results that are sustainable. These are the patients that some patients need to stay on low dose GLP-1 for a long time, but other patients can transition off of them completely because they've lost the body fat and they've got their pillars in place. So this is the success story, right? And this takes us directly into our next segment, which is that weight regain after stopping GLP-1s.
So I think this is the segment that every person who's on these medicines or considering the medicines or prescribing these, if you're on the provider side or physician side, needs to really deeply understand, because the weight regain data is very real and it's kind of sobering.
Yeah, weight regain. It's something we see all too common. And let's get straight to the evidence. There was a step 4 trial with semaglutide enrolled participants who had already lost an average of 17% of their body weight on the medication over 20 weeks of intense GLP-1 therapy. Then the trial randomized them to either continue semaglutide or switch to a placebo, which is kind of like a fake dose of the medication. And they maintained the same lifestyle counseling in both groups. The placebo group So these are the patients that didn't know they were taking basically a fake injection.
Just getting saline injections.
Yep. So they regained approximately 2/3 of their lost weight within 1 year of stopping the medication, compared to the group that was actually still on the medication of semaglutide. 2/3 in 1 year with ongoing lifestyle support.
2/3. And I want to be pretty unambiguous about why that happened, because the popular interpretation is that these people failed. They went back to their bad habits. That's not really what the biology shows.
Yeah. Pretty much when you lose weight by any mechanism, your body mounts basically a counter response. Leptin, which is this hormone that's secreted by our fat cells or adipose cells. And leptin is what signals your brain that the energy stores are adequate. That drops when your fat mass decreases. So the brain interprets lower leptin as a threat to survival. We talked about it in part 1 of this episode, that it's that evolutionary survival mechanism over thousands of years that developed that scarcity evolutionary property that we have, that our body wants to retain fat and calorie dense foods. The brain interprets lower leptin as a threat to survival and as the beginning of famine. So in response, your ghrelin rises, your hunger drive amplifies, and your metabolic rate decreases, sometimes by 10 to 15% below what you'd predict from your body weight alone. And that comes because that's what happened in times of famine, right? You lowered your resting metabolic rate to preserve the calories and resources that you had in your body. So your body is burning fewer calories at the same time than it was before it was losing weight. And this is that compensatory response that can persist for years after weight loss from a GLP-1.
GLP-1 meds pharmacologically override the homeostatic counter response while they're in the system. So they suppress ghrelin, they amplify satiety, they slow gastric emptying, they reduce that food noise. But then when the medicine is discontinued, the drug clears after a few weeks. Semaglutide has a half-life of about a week. So it takes roughly 4 to 5 weeks to reach basically like negligible levels. And then the homeostatic counter response comes back in full force in a body that now has much less lean muscle mass and a lower resting metabolic rate than it had before the weight loss ever happened.
Yep. And this is why stopping these GLP-1 medications without a lifestyle foundation in place, with data, right, with a full body DEXA scan, with your VO2 max to target your zone 1 and 2 for fat burning, this is what's so dangerous from a body composition standpoint. You're not just back where you started metabolically, you're potentially in a worse position than when you started before the GLP-1. You have a lower resting metabolic rate, less muscle than when you started, same or similar food environment. You haven't really adjusted your habits. And with the full force of that counter response now unopposed, right? Your body is in conservation mode.
Now, I want to be clear about what this means for how we should think about these medications clinically, because there's a lot of nuance here that sometimes gets lost. For many patients with significant obesity and already established cardiometabolic disease, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, severe sleep apnea, NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or MAFLD, the evidence currently supports long-term or indefinite use of these drugs. Just as we don't stop blood pressure medications once blood pressure is controlled, we don't necessarily stop the drug that's managing the chronic disease once the disease is in remission.
Oh yeah. The problem is cost, right? The price tag on some of these medications, sometimes it can be $1,000 a month. Tirzepatide is similar. Insurance coverage is so inconsistent. I swear to God, the number of F-bombs I've dropped with these prior authorizations. Like when I started, oh gosh, I finished residency 16 years ago. like prior authorization wasn't even a term. Like it wasn't even in our vocabulary as doctors. Now, every single freaking medication, including generic $4 medications, we have to run a prior auth for. So, okay, I'll stop my rant. I'm complaining. Are you done with my complaining?
Thank you.
No, but for patients who can't sustain that cost long term, the conversation about how to transition is essential. And that should happen before treatment begins in the first place, not after 2 years of weight loss and when the prescription suddenly stops being covered by insurance or becomes unaffordable.
So what does a reasonable transition strategy really look like? Because I think people need to stop these medications for all kinds of real and legitimate reasons, right? Cost is one of the reasons, side effect is one, pregnancy, or you actually hit your goal target weight. And the answer shouldn't be just like, okay, good luck. Now you're done, right? We have to actually have a game plan for how we're going to transition. I think a lot of that game plan starts with how we've built these pillars that we've just covered, not after. So resistance training should be a really well established habit, not something you're going to start after coming off of the medication. Protein intake should be automated by this point. You should know exactly how to hit your target without some sort of like true conscious effort. The processed food environment around you should have been restructured at this point. These are not things that you're going to set up the week before discontinuing. They're things that take months to establish and stabilize.
Yeah, we discuss tapering strategies as well when clinically appropriate. Rather than abrupt discontinuation, we gradually reduce the dose of your GLP-1 over several months. And that can kind of blunt that homeostatic counter response that we talked about and make less of a dramatic trigger. And the evidence base for tapering is still developing, but mechanistically it makes sense. And we've seen better outcomes in our patients who've tapered versus those who stop abruptly. I've even had patients on the lowest dose that I'm like, instead of taking it once a week, space it out every 10 days and then every 2 weeks. And they end up feeling like it's less of a drop off.
This is super important because in that period of I'm getting pretty close to my weight loss goal, you have to know how to be eucaloric, which means you have to know how to be at your baseline caloric need. So if before this whole weight loss journey started, if you were eating 3,500 calories a day and you lost a bunch of weight, now your new goal, because you just dropped 50 pounds, is I need to be at 2,500 calories a day. Well, the entire time that you're in weight loss, you're eating under that. That's how you're losing weight. The second you come off of the medicine, now you have to know how to eat just 2,500 calories a day so that you're not gaining or losing weight. And this is what happens if you have not structured out, well, what does 2,500 calories a day actually look like? This is the amount that I need to maintain my weight. I've just been in a deficit this entire time because I was losing weight this entire process. I don't know what my stable caloric need actually looks like for me. What a quantity of food is that? That's where I think people really fail. They just rely on their brain to tell them, and their brain is going to revert back to, I am way under where I was, and these ghrelin and leptin levels are not where they're supposed to be. We need to increase appetite, which is what leads to that 2/3 weight gain back in a year, right? And so what you're suggesting of spreading out the dose, right? You slowly start tapering the dose, spread out the time between your injections, and that'll allow you the time to recalibrate your appetite to, okay, I'm not really losing anymore. I need to stay net zero. I need to figure out the amount I need to eat to be able to maintain this exact body weight and not lose anymore.
Yeah, those patients that end up doing really well are the ones that are doing their DEXA scan, doing their VO2 max, their resting metabolic rate, and tracking the changes. And so before they get off the medication or titrate down, they know what their resting metabolic rate is and that homeostatic, their calorie requirement. So they're kind of going in armed with the information they need.
It's super easy for us to test resting metabolic rate with our patients and say, oh, look, you lost 35 pounds. This is your new resting metabolic rate because we've actually tested it. This is what your target for the amount of activity you're doing a day is, so that for a couple weeks, you need to track your calories so that you know, okay, this is what should feel right when you're eating now that you're coming off of these medications.
And I just want to note my resting metabolic rate went up because I put on a few pounds of muscle. So therefore I can have an extra glass of wine or have the chocolate cake because
You're a badass.
I am a baddie. Our kids, they like roll their eyes when I say stuff like that. All right, let's move into the next segment, which is the wild, wild west of compounding, telehealth mills, patient safety being compromised. Let's get into it.
Yeah, this is, could be a patient safety crisis. It just kind of depends on a lot of things. You're relying on a bunch of people who are not 100% regulated by the government. So a little background for listeners who may not know, compounding pharmacies are regulated pharmacies, but under a different regulatory framework than large commercial manufacturers like Pfizer or Eli Lilly or Novo Nordisk, who makes Ozempic, right? So these compounding pharmacies, they can produce custom formulations of drugs that are actually FDA approved using those drugging ingredients, including things like semaglutide or tirzepatide. During the years when the FDA had approved GLP-1 medications, there was a shortage of the drugs. And compounding pharmacies were legally permitted to produce and sell these formulations directly to patients, often at a dramatically lower price than what Eli Lilly or Novo Nordisk was selling them for. So literally it could be $150 to $300 a month versus $1,000-$1,300 a month for the branded medication.
Yeah. And for the patients who couldn't afford or access those FDA approved formulations, we literally had patients with morbid obesity that would get denied for these medications, or even sometimes diabetics, like their employer insurance plan just didn't cover GLP-1s. I don't even know how that's a thing. And generally those same employers, like getting a Viagra would be easier to approve than getting a GLP-1, which is insane to me. But that regulatory landscape has definitely shifted. And now the quality control piece of these compounding pharmacies are most definitely significant.
So let's be specific about some of these concerns. Compounded GLP-1 formulations are not subject to the same FDA oversight or scrutiny with, like the medications like Ozempic or Wegovy or Mounjaro are under. There have been documented cases of incorrect dosing, either too low, meaning not enough clinical effect, or too high, meaning dangerous overdosing, leading to those severe GI complications and even sometimes hospitalization. There have been documented cases of contamination. There have been cases of substitution where the formulations that are being marketed as semaglutide actually contain tirzepatide or vice versa, or that contain some entirely different compound.
Yeah. And there's also the telehealth mill issue, which is related but distinct. There's been this rapid expansion of direct to consumer telehealth prescribing of GLP medications. I think HERS, HIMS, Row. There's literally a 5-minute intake and auto approval shipped to your door mechanism. And this has put serious medications in the hands of patients who have had no clinical evaluation. no baseline lab work, no monitoring plan, and no follow-up. They've never been counseled on protein intake, resistance training, risks of the medication. They've never even had a baseline set of labs. The prescribing physician usually has never even spoken with the patient.
From an ER physician's perspective, I've seen the complications of GLP-1 meds in the ED. It's not super frequent, but they definitely exist. And those complications can be things like severe gastroparesis. I've had patients pass out from hypoglycemia because they're also on concurrent diabetes medications and they're not really being monitored well. Patients on these drugs who arrive for elective surgery and hadn't been counseled correctly to hold the medication before anesthesia, which then, it can create an aspiration risk because of the slow gastric emptying. These are all manageable complications in a well-monitored patient. They're avoidable disasters in an unmonitored one.
So this is our guidance for listeners. If you're accessing compounded GLP-1 meds, understand what you're accepting. Sometimes it can be unverified dosing, unverified purity. If you're going through a telehealth service and you've never had a real clinical conversation with a prescriber, you've never had a full history, full examination, your lab panel's done and your goals reviewed, that's a patient safety concern and you 100% should address it.
We're definitely not saying, never use these medications outside of a specialty practice. What we're saying is whatever path you use to access them, make sure that there's some real clinician involved who can just order the baseline labs, monitor your response, manage your side effects, someone you actually have a real clinical relationship with that can answer your questions if something goes wrong and if you're not getting the outcome that you really want. That's really the minimum standard of care, and it's not currently universal in how these medications are prescribed, and especially how many people we know are obtaining them, which is basically like gray market off the internet.
All right, let's bring the full 2-parter series of our GLP-1 episodes home. There's 5 clinical takeaways for both episodes and the things we want you to carry with you.
Okay, number 1, weight isn't entirely a willpower problem. It is a biology meets environment mismatch problem. Our bodies were built to sustain during food scarcity. We live currently in an unprecedented food abundance engineered by a $1 trillion industry to really override those satiety signals. The shame and moralizing around obesity it's not helpful. It's scientifically illiterate. Understanding the biology changes the whole conversation.
Yep. Number 2, GLP-1, GIP agonists, they represent the most significant advance in metabolic medications since statins. And I think they're more widely used than statins. And semaglutide, tirzepatide, and the emerging oral forms, even Retta, are producing results we never thought possible with pharmacology alone. So they're producing bariatric surgery-like results from gastric bypass. The cardiovascular, kidney, liver, sleep apnea, cognitive benefits go far beyond weight. And they're serious, life-changing medications. And these medications deserve serious, thoughtful clinical use.
Number 3, the muscle loss is real. It's measurable. It's largely preventable, but only with deliberate action. Somewhere between 1.6 and 2.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight daily is pure necessity on these drugs. Structured resistance training 2 to 3 times a week for 30-35 minutes. DEXA scans initially to track what your body composition, and then to keep tracking, not just using the scale. These are not really optional add-ons. They are the clinical standard of care for anyone who's on these medications and really cares about the long game.
Number 4, stopping these GLP medications without your lifestyle foundation in place will result in significant weight gain for most people. And the biology is unambiguous on this. We've seen the trials where they showed 2/3 of weight regain for most people within 1 year. And this medication, all of these class of medications, it's a pharmacological override of a homeostatic system that doesn't go away. So we want to use that window to build the habits while you're on the medication, right? Put in the work, build the muscle, start your fitness journey. And the dietary patterns you need to start that we can sustain and keep the weight off. The medications get you to the summit. The lifestyle is what keeps you there.
Number 5, just be smart about how you're accessing and using the meds, right? Get a real clinical evaluation, get baseline labs, monitor your body composition, understand what you're getting if you use compounded formulations, work with a physician who actually treats you as a complete human being, your metabolism, your hormones, your sleep, your goals, not just a weight on a scale or a prescription to fill.
If you want to explore whether you're a candidate for GLP-1 therapy or for comprehensive longevity and a metabolic assessment, please call us. You can find us at mdlongevitylab.com. We see patients across the country, and some of them fly in to Chicago, which is super nice.
If this 2-part episode was useful, and I honestly, genuinely hope it was, please share it. Leave us a review. Send it to somebody who's already on Ozempic for the last year without a real plan. Send it to someone whose doctor handed them a prescription in a 3-minute visit and called it care. Please follow us on our social media at MD Longevity Lab and on our Substack.
All right, guys, that's playing the long game. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Thank you for playing the long game with MD Longevity Lab. You can visit us at www.mdlongevitylab.com to learn more about how we can support you on your journey. Stay connected with us on social media at MD Longevity Lab for tips, updates, and behind-the-scenes insights. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you subscribed, left us a rating, or shared it with someone you know who's also playing the long game. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.